Gotcha.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another Monster Hunter World video. This is Thegameconomist, and today I'm going to be sharing my top 5 tier list for the Gunlances. Before we begin the list, I want to start by talking about a few fundamental tips for using the Gunlances, in case you've never used them before and you clicked on this video because you're curious about trying them out. Let me begin by kind of explaining what a Gunlance is. Gunlances, they have an explosive damage attack called shelling. Shelling is not like a true projectile, it's just an explosive at the end of your weapon. Despite looking like a gun and having what looks like a clip of ammunition, Gunlances do not actually shoot projectiles. Think of them more like exploding lances. The ammunition tells you how many shells you can fire before needing to reload your gunlance, and reloading your weapon must be done manually with button inputs. Tip number 2, there are 3 different types of shelling: normal, long, and wide, and the type of shelling your Gunlance has will determine the best attack combos and builds that you should bring for that Gunlance. So the Gunlances get kind of complicated because there's 3 different types of Gunlances, and you could argue really there's 4 different types of Gunlances, with the 4th type being melee. Normal shelling means your Gunlance will have 4 bullets, and that you can get a lot of damage from performing an attack combination that includes a full burst. Long shelling means your Gunlance will have 3 bullets, and they'll have the best range out of all of the shelling types, and your best attack in that case is going to be charging your shells. Wide shelling only holds 2 bullets, but it has the largest close range hitbox, and you do the most damage per uncharged shot. The best attack combination for the wide shelling Gunlance is to attack with the thrust, like you would with the regular lance, and then to shell right afterwards. So the attack combination will be poke, shell, poke, reload. Finally, I need to talk about melee Gunlances. Basically, these are Gunlances where you won't worry about bringing the artillery skill, you won't worry about bringing the capacity skill, and basically you're going to be using the attack combinations that don't involve any shelling. It's a very different type of gameplay for the Gunlances, and it allows you to look for the Gunlance with the highest attack value, and ignore basically the level of the shelling or the type of shelling, because it doesn't matter, right? It also allows you to focus on sharpness builds that include the Draken armor, because you're not really going to worry about the shelling dropping all of your sharpness to nothing. The last thing I might mention is that there's a special type of playstyle for melee Gunlances where you can hop backwards off of a ledge and then jump back onto the ledge using right trigger, and this is another reason to use melee Gunlances. We call it aerial Gunlances. Okay, so that's tip number 2. Tip number 3, I've talked about the differences between normal, long, and wide shelling as well as melee shelling. The next thing I need to mention is that there are levels to the shelling as well. So I've talked about shelling types, now we're going to talk about shelling level. The levels simply determine how strong the shells are going to be. So the higher the level, the more damage your Gunlance does. And right now the highest level for all of the shelling types is level 4. That means whenever we look for a strong shelling Gunlance, we check to make sure it has level 4 shelling, with the exception of Gunlances where we want to only use melee attacks, in which case the shelling doesn't matter. And that basically wraps up the main tips I have for identifying Gunlances. I just want to make sure you guys can follow along with my reasoning when I lay out the tier list. The only other thing I would mention is that it's difficult to master Gunlances because you're being asked to do so many things that require extra proficiency, including learning how to hop to get around and dodge, managing your weapon sharpness on a weapon that loses sharpness very quickly, managing your reloads, and dealing with the tricky button inputs for the attack combinations. And I guess I should also mention that 2 key skills for using the Gunlance include artillery and capacity boost. Artillery boosts the damage of your shelling, as well as wyvern stake and wyvern fire. Artillery also increases decreases the recharge time for wyvern fire, meaning you can use it more often. And the wyvern fire is an attack where you have a long windup, and it works very similar to the heavy bowguns of wyvern ammo, although I consider it to be inferior to wyvern ammo because Wyvern Fire's damage, for whatever reason, is broken into 3 parts, whereas Wyvern Ammo's damage occurs in a single proc of damage, and that gives it an advantage as a wake-up attack. I'm not really sure why they decided to break it up for Gunlances, or why Wyvern Fire has to knock you so far away when you've used it, because honestly, Gunlances have a pretty slow approach. But maybe Capcom will consider changing it in the future to improve its usage. I would at least like for the damage to be a single proc to make it a better wake-up attack. The other skill I mentioned, Capacity Boost, which is actually a very rare decoration to unlock, gives you an extra bullet per clip on your Gunlance, and is the other direct way to increase your damage output on your build. Melee Gunlance builds won't have to worry about this skill, which is one of the advantages of having a melee-only build. Hopefully Capcom includes some new armor soon that gives you capacity boost on an efficient piece of armor. It sucks that this is such an important skill for Gunlances and that it's so difficult to add to the build. I would prefer a new chest piece that includes the capacity boost skill, because right now I don't feel like Gunlances have a lot of good chest options, unless you're using long shelling, in which case you might use the Damascus chest. But yeah, I don't feel like there's enough good chest options for Gunlances. Finally, don't forget the feline food skill, Bombardier, which I believe gives the player an additional 10% damage to their shelling. You can use food vouchers to increase the odds of this food skill activating, and if you need more vouchers, you can get more of them by playing the event quest called Meet the Gluttons. Okay, and now that I'm done with the tips and we're moving on to the tier list, let me explain that each of the 5 tiers may contain honorable mentions. I'll also provide a generic build for you to think about and try to copy as well. Let's begin. In the lowest tier, 5th place, we're going to be reserving that for normal shelling Gunlances. I considered not having them on the list at all, because I don't really recommend using them. However, I also don't want to be too closed-minded about normal shelling, and I also figured it's best if you knew which Gunlances are strongest for this shelling type, so here they are on the list. Let me explain my reasoning for not recommending normal shelling. To give you the short version, you're better off building for pure melee with a melee Gunlance, rather than building for burst shelling, which is what you would build for with the normal Gunlance. The melee build is going to be a lot more efficient because it doesn't need capacity boost or artillery or help with weapon sharpness. The normal shelling burst combo eats through your sharpness very quickly. Since both Gunlance types are going to be using the slower attack combination, you might as well just go melee and enjoy not losing your sharpness and enjoy a more efficient high damage build. Now, with that being said, the best normal shelling Gunlance is going to be the Tereth Buster Sleep, with an honorable mention for the Royal Burst, which is craftable. I don't have the Tereth Buster Sleep, despite farming Kulve Taroth for probably hundreds and hundreds of hours at this point, so I'll show you what the build might look like on the Rarity 7 version, since it also has level 4 normal shelling, which is the most important part. Here's a few combat tips. When you're fighting with the normal shelling Gunlance, look for ledges you can hop off of, because you can use an aerial attack where you release the full burst of normal shells into the air, or you can press right trigger to slam down with your weapon, and this will reload all of your shells and allow you to immediately follow up with a full burst. Other than that, you'll go through the long attack combo on the Gunlance and keep spamming it until the monster moves out of position or interrupts you, or you're forced to resharpen your weapon. Note that Gunlances need resharpening by the time they reach the tan sharpness bar. I'm also going to highly recommend bringing the Rocksteady Mantle, because the slow combination, well, you're most likely going to take a hit from the monster while you go through the animation. My DPS tests showed that the full burst attack should outdamage the other shelling types in theory, but in practice, I simply found it too slow for fighting the Arch-Tempered Elder Dragons, who are much more difficult to knock over or flinch, and they deal high damage to you when they land a move, and they move around aggressively. Maybe we'll get a future normal shell Gunlance with a huge sharpness bar. I think that would really help move normal shelling up the tier list. That's my opinion anyways. Alright, time to move on to 4th place, which goes to the Tereth Buster Bomber, a level 4 wide shelling Gunlance, and a level 7 rarity reward from Kulve Taroth. This is a solid choice for anyone who wants to get into Gunlancing. It does slightly less melee damage than the Tereth Buster Water, which is the reason it falls lower down the list. My opinion of the wide shelling Gunlances is that they're currently a very good option for most, if not all, of your runs, because you can focus on higher damage builds by mixing melee and artillery and capacity boost skills. And then the wide shelling playstyle is one of the best for aggressive players because the shorter recovery animation between your shells and your pokes allow you to react to the monster's attacks and either guard or reposition or dodge an attack without losing much of your damage output. So if you haven't gotten lucky enough to unlock Terith Buster Water or Terith Buster Bomber, you can still opt for the Kovtaroth Rarity 6 reward Bomber Gold Exploder. And don't worry about building for melee damage, just build for shelling in that case, and spam the shelling, the Wyvern Fire, and the Wyvern Stake. I'll go ahead and show you a build for the Buster Bomber, and here's a build for the Bomber Gold Exploder. I highly recommend these wide 4 Gunlances, and they come in 4th place because they're marginally worse than another option, and I'll get to that later down the list. Coming in 3rd place is the King Gold Exploder. King Gold Exploder is a level 4 long shelling Gunlance, and it's actually not that hard to obtain either because it's also a Rarity 6 Kovtaroth weapon. That makes it the 3rd Kovtaroth Rarity 6 weapon that I know is worth keeping, the others being the Glutton Gold Cannon as well as the Bomber Gold Exploder that I just mentioned. King Gold Exploder is arguably the best defensive Gunlance in the game right now, and I'll explain why. With long shelling Gunlances, you don't bother using melee attacks anyways because you just charge your shells over and over and over, and then you reload. So on your build, you're going to want artillery and capacity boost like usual, as well as you'll pick up the focus skill so that the shells charge faster. That's really important for getting your DPS out. And then you're basically done building for damage, and the rest of your build can just go toward defensive skills or maxing the Palico skill if you want to boost the damage of your Palico. In terms of pure shelling build, King Gold Exploder outperforms the other Gunlances, doing more damage than wide and normal Gunlances thanks to its high charged shell damage. It's also useful that the long shells have the most range, which doesn't just mean they're best for defensive shelling, they're also useful for fighting flying monsters or monsters that move around aggressively, which is basically all of the Arch-Tempered Elder Dragons, especially Arch-Tempered Kushala Daura. So if you want to use the Gunlances in a style where you build a lot of defense, but still optimize shelling damage with artillery, this is the Gunlance you want to use, and it's very easy to obtain. I should also give a shout out to the craftable Earthshaker Magda Lahat, which is also a wide shelling Gunlance. However, King Gold Exploder is a better option because it's going to come with 3 augmentation slots, 2 of which you should use for health regeneration, whereas the Magda Lahat only has a single augmentation slot, so it only gets an honorable mention. Finally, here's a build that should give you some ideas on what you're trying to accomplish with the King Gold Exploder. Notice there's a lot of room for flexibility depending on what your needs are. Next up, taking 2nd place, we have the Deviljho weapon Insatiable Gunlance. This is going to be a melee Gunlance where you won't bother with the shelling at all, and I seriously had to debate whether or not to put this in 1st place because it technically reaches higher levels of damage in the game than any other Gunlance right now by using that aerial ledge hopping technique that I mentioned at the beginning. The reason I inevitably decided to put it into 2nd place is because I realized you can't use ledge hopping in every situation, and especially you can't use it in multiplayer because your opportunities to spam the ledge hop are really limited. The other thing you will do with the Insatiable Gunlance, of course, is just to play it like a shellless melee Gunlance. It's kind of like using a lance, except you have a very slow moveset that deals more damage per hit. Remember the normal Gunlances, how I was saying their burst combo is similar to the melee Gunlance combo? That's because you just skip the burst part of the combo and move on to the wide sweep and then reset with quick reload. Building melee on Gunlances is incredibly strong because you can focus all of the skill set into setting up crit boost and handicraft, and you won't lose that sharpness quickly like you would if you were using shells, and the slow combo just deals a lot of damage, which is the other important point. The only major problem with going full melee is that, similar to the normal Gunlance, the combo can be interrupted, or the monster can move away while you're stuck in the animation, or trade with you while you're wearing Rocksteady Mantle, except they can do so much damage that it's not a good trade. That's the other reason this Gunlance stays in second place, because when you aren't ledge hopping and you're just playing regular melee, I feel that the very slow animation recovery puts you in too much danger and makes it too difficult to chase the monster and react in time to keep your damage output up, which means you rely on Rocksteady Mantle and keeping the monster juggled. Now, I'll go ahead and show you a build for using a melee setup. I also want to mention, if you're trying to play aerial with this Gunlance, go check out some of TSC's speedruns to get an idea about who to use that playstyle on and how it works out, and don't forget to add the airborne skill to your setup. Alright, and finally, it's time to talk about my first place choice, the Tareth Buster Water. Tareth Buster Water is a wide fork Gunlance where you can build for white sharpness and add the Elementalist decoration for a nice damage boost. It's a rarity 8 Kulturoth weapon, so you may not get one of these for a long time. You can see that it's actually very close to the Buster Bomber in terms of damage, and that means taking first place is really a marginal win between the two weapons. You might even find matchups where you prefer Buster Bomber just because Buster Bomber gets an extra augmentation slot, which would be able to fit an extra health regen augmentation, and this would help you casually against maybe Teostra, Lunastra, or Valhazak. Now, however, highly skilled players probably won't worry about an extra health regen augmentation as much, and instead will be interested in the efficient damage boost that you gain from the Elementalist skill. I think what I want you guys to take away from my choice for first place is that I believe the Tareth Buster Water will hold its place as the difficulty of the game scales up. The Insatiable Gunlance's slow recovery frames reach a threshold where your trades and over-reliance on Rocksteady Mantle will hold you back against the strongest monsters, whereas Tareth Buster Water won't have that problem because wide shelling has the shortest recovery frames of any Gunlance playstyle. Long shelling will be more defensive, but do less damage, so the fight's gonna last longer. And that's something a lot of players aren't looking for. Meanwhile, the most difficult monster to solo in the game, Extreme Behemoth, continues to establish the high damage meta by forcing players to do enough damage before the timer runs out. So that's my reasoning behind choosing the Tareth Buster Water for first place. It's the highest damage wide shelling Gunlance, and when a stronger one comes out, there's a fair chance that it will be the new Gunlance meta. And that's my tier list for the Gunlances. Let me go ahead and show you guys a build. Let me know what you guys think of my choices, and let me know what weapon class you would like for me to investigate next. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.